All right, welcome to another episode of ICU Doc Talk. Sorry, I tried to do this weekly, but I've been having trouble finding the time. So I'll do the best I can. But it's been trouble getting this up weekly with just how busy my life is. But I do continue on planning on doing this podcast because I do enjoy it, and it's nice to engage with you know with you all that listen and read your emails, and with with the audience that I genuinely enjoy talking to. So I'll keep doing this, but it's hard to do it every week. But I'll keep trying. Today I just wanted to share some stories, just recent stuff, just kind of crazy stuff. Sometimes I just step back and I have a crazy job, and crazy things can happen at any day, at any time. So I first want to talk about a surgery. Anesthetic I did for a surgery for a paraganglioma. Let's talk about that. What is a paraganglioma? All right, so a paraganglioma basically it's like a tumor. It's an abnormal growth of cells that they form along. It's a type of nerve cell. It's called a neuroendocrine tumor, and it's a tumor of a type of nerve cell that's found all throughout the body, and a specific nerve cell called chromaffin cells. And these chromaffin cells, they help regulate blood pressure in your body. Okay, so that's kind of paraganglioma. They're usually benign, but here they can be cancerous, and they can spread, and they can be metastatic. They're really rare, and they can occur in young people. They can occur usually people that aren't older than 50 when they're diagnosed with this. Here's the problem with paragangliomas. They secrete catecholamines, meaning norepinephrine, epinephrine, which they can secrete it in such high levels that they can cause someone's heart rate and blood pressure to be sky high, unbelievably high, and which can cause all sorts of problems. And then they can also cause someone to have a stroke. So these tumors, if someone has them, they have to come out, because you cannot walk around living with a tumor that is just secreting a bunch of epinephrine and norepinephrine to your body at any time. Okay, so I do anesthetic for resection of these tumors. Another type of tumor, it's a similar type of tumor, is called a pheochromocytoma. Okay, so I do at the academic center I work at. We have surgeons that are specialized in these neuroendocrine tumors that are very, very skilled and at resecting these tumors. So they have to come out. So I do these not infrequently in my anesthetic group, and they're some of the wildest rides in surgery that I do. They're some of the most challenging cases anesthetics I do. That's why I wanted to share with you some examples of doing these cases, paragangliomas or the pheochromocytomas. So there's quite a few challenges when we're approaching patients with tumors like this. For one thing, they have they have wild hemodynamic swings during surgery, meaning their blood pressure can be up, it can be down, it can be all over the place, and certainly they can die during surgery because of this. So you have the hemodynamic instability portion that can happen. Now, the other big issue with these tumors is that they are often encased in vasculature, meaning there's blood vessels that surround these tissues, or that surround these tumors. And as the surgeon gets into these tumors and starts to resect them out, they can bleed a lot. They can absolutely bleed out, and that's a big problem as well. So these are challenging cases. So I had a case of a young woman who had one of these, and the way that she presented, this young woman, she presented in PAA arrest. This is how her tumor presented, meaning she had pulseless electrical activity. She coded at not in my institution, but outside hospital, in an emergency department somewhere, and she was brought back, and she had a stroke. And then they scanned her, and they found this paraganglioma in her belly. It was around her abdominal aorta, and it was highly encased in vasculature. It was also had entrapped one of her ureters, which is the thing that comes off the kidney that helps drain urine from your kidney down into your bladder. And it was also surrounding her aorta. So obviously she survived with no neurological deficits from this code, but now she has this tumor, and so she comes to my institution where the surgeons that here are here, ready to resect the tumor. Now it was a huge surgical. So this particular surgery required 3 different types of surgeons, right? A general surgeon who specializes in these neuroendocrine tumors, a vascular surgeon to help resect the tumor away from the aorta, or possibly resect the aorta and replace it with a graft, and then a urologist to possibly see if they can disentangle the ureter from the tumor, and if they can't do that, then they do a nephrectomy, which is take the kidney out. So that was the problem that this young woman faced. Now, preoperatively, these patients need to be medically managed. Their blood pressure needs to be put under control. They need to be on antihypertensive or anti-blood pressure medications. Preoperatively, they must. If they're not placed on these things, the surgery would be a complete disaster. Because, as I said, one of the problems is they have super high blood pressure, right, walking around. But then now imagine a surgeon gets in and starts poking the tumor. Every time they poke the tumor and manipulate the tumor and trying to get surgical exposure, they are dumping a bunch of epinephrine and norepinephrine, adrenaline, into the patient's bloodstream. Again, big problem, enormous problem. So the blood pressure needs to be under control, a very specific regimen. So just to zoom out a little bit, let's talk about adrenergic receptors a little bit. Okay, I'll get into a little technical jargon, but I swear I won't stay too long here. So if you're, medical, you're probably familiar with there's alpha receptors and there's beta receptors throughout your body. There's alpha 1, there's alpha 2, there's beta 1, there's beta 2. And these receptors are all throughout. All of your tissues, they're in your blood, they line your blood vessels, they line your you have some in your spinal cord, you have them in your bronchial tree in your lungs. And they respond to catecholamines, which is another word for norepinephrine or epinephrine, right? They respond in different ways depending on what tissue has those receptors. So just to review, alpha-1 receptors, right? If you hit those receptors, you cause vasoconstriction, right? So epinephrine and norepinephrine hit those receptors. So does like phenylephrine, and it causes vasoconstriction. It causes your blood pressure to go up. Alpha-2 is actually the opposite, right? Alpha-2 agonist is something, like dexmedetomidine, which this is a topic for another time, but alpha-2 receptors helps with analgesia and helps with pain control. Oftentimes we wonder why does alpha-2, why does this system exist? And alpha-2 receptors can cause blood pressure to go down and your heart rate to go down as well. To me, it's a pop-off valve for your physiological pop-off valve, right? So if you have a fight or flight response, you see a bear, your adrenal glands dump a bunch of epinephrine, norepinephrine into your system. Your blood pressure goes sky high to get you to run. But then your alpha-2 receptors are there because your epinephrine and norepinephrine are also stimulated by alpha-2 is also stimulated by norepinephrine and epinephrine. And it's a negative feedback loop to put the brakes on the physiological system and also to give you analgesia, right? I mean, you always hear stories, or maybe you've had personal experiences where you, were in some sort of traumatic accident and you didn't feel any pain for a little bit. And that's because the adrenaline is actually can be analgesic. Probably. I'm speculating a little bit there. And this not exactly my field of expertise, so take that with a grain of salt. Anyway, and then you have beta 1, right, which causes like your heart rate to go up. Epinephrine, norepinephrine definitely hit those. And then you have beta 2. If you hit those, that can cause vasodilation, bronchodilation of your bronchial tree, which can help you breathe better. Anyway, so all of these receptors are there for a fight or flight physiological response. So why do I bring this all up? I swear this is imperative to what I'm talking about. So the reason I bring this up is if someone has a bunch of epinephrine and norepinephrine in their bloodstream from a tumor that's constantly secreting it, it's hitting all those receptors. Now we have different medications. There's a whole host of anti-hypertensive medications, right? There's beta blockers, which block the beta receptors, just like I talked about. Now, if you were to take these patients and give them a selective beta blocker, and just that, well, you're going to cause a problem. You're going to have unopposed alpha-1 stimulation, and you could actually make their hypertension even worse. So you can't just put them on a beta blocker. You have to block everything. You have to block the alpha receptors and the beta receptors to completely block the catecholamine release that's going on. So you have to give them alpha blockers and beta blockers. This can be achieved in many ways. There's the alpha 1 blockers that are typically used in this case preoperatively are phentolamine and phenoxybenzamine. And then a beta, you can give, metoprolol as a beta blocker. Anyway, you got to have them on a stable regimen, at least quite a bit before surgery to prepare them for surgery. They must be on these medications. Now, there's another medication that these patients can frequently be on preoperatively called metiracine, which blocks it blocks the excessive sympathetic stimulation in these types of tumors. It can help as well. It can help quite a bit as well. Again, I'm not an expert. Usually a medicine, endocrinologist is consulted to help with this preoperatively to help these patients. It must be done. The surgery cannot be done unless they have this blockade going on, because as soon as you stimulate them with anything, anesthesia, the things that we do, or the surgery, they could have a stroke and die on the table. So this blockade must be done. You must ensure that must be done. Now, when I'm also approaching these surgeries, I look at all the imaging myself. I don't just read the radiology read, right? Of course I read the radiology read, because the radiology knows how to read imaging better than I do. But I read imaging I look at radiological reads all the time with stuff, right? And I look at the tumor, I look at where it is, I look at the vasculature and how close it is to major vessels. So the young woman I'm talking about, again, it was encased all around the aorta. So she basically needed 3 surgeons to help her out in what was booked as a 12-hour case. 12 hours as an estimation of how long this case would take. So this was, right? This is super challenging thing, case to start. So, for this particular patient, I had a long email chain with the surgeons about about our plans, to get this young woman safely through the surgery, through an extremely dangerous surgery. So my anesthetic concerns for the operation were, number one, in no particular order, but number one was pain control, because this patient's going to get an open laparotomy, right? Which is a big midline abdominal incision that they're going to open up and do the surgery through, obviously, to get exposure to the tumor, which was retroperitoneal, which was behind all of the guts and stuff, back to the vessels beyond there. So I worry about pain control. So, doing a thoracic epidural is an option. So I'm worried about pain control. So with that, backing it up, so doing a thoracic epidural. So something that I considered doing. However, there's kind of a risk if you put in a thoracic epidural, and if the patient needs to have their aorta resected, which the vascular surgeon was putting at a greater 50% chance, because you can't quite tell from the imaging if the tumor had invaded the aorta or if it was just kind of adhered to the outside, the adventitia, tissue of the outside of the aorta. So you don't really know. A surgeon doesn't really know sometimes what they're able to do until they get actual surgical exposure. And so, would the surgeon be able to peel off the tumor from the aorta, or would they have to actually resect the aorta and then replace the aorta with a graft? We didn't know until you're in. And to do that, you have to do that resection. You'd have to cross clamp the aorta, and giving heparin, a good healthy amount of heparin to prevent clotting would be necessary. And there's a little bit of a risk of having epidural catheter in the epidural space. When you heparinize, that maybe you get an epidural hematoma. It can be done. I don't think it's crazy to do it, an epidural in this case, but we all kind of decided in collaboration with the surgeons that maybe it's not the best idea. So I decided to do a intrathecal Dikotter, which is basically doing a spinal, getting spinal access to the cerebral spinal fluid. This was while the patient was awake. Put a needle in the bottom of her back and injected Dikotter, which is an opiate, right into her cerebral spinal fluid. So deliver opiates right to her spinal cord. And then did not leave a catheter behind, so you don't have the risk of epidural hematoma. Epidural hematoma, for those that aren't aware, is a big deal, and it can cause paralysis. And it's one of our dreaded complications with an epidural. Generally, you don't put one in with therapeutic anticoagulation. Anyway, that's a topic for another time. So we proceeded with a intrathecal Dikotter, which was fine. 200, 300 mics is usually how we dose it. Anyway, okay. So, and then my two other major concerns are huge swings in hemodynamics. So I'm worried about hypertension, really bad high blood pressure. I'm also worried about the blood pressure tanking after the tumor's resected. So I've already talked about why we're worried about hypertension, right? You're poking the tumor, the surgeon's poking the tumor, and it's causing high catecholamine release, and it's causing high blood pressure. And then there's also high blood pressure. I can cause it by intubating the patient, putting in lines, just by stimulating their bodies, their blood pressure can spike and go through the roof as well. Okay, but so now what happens is after the tumor is resected, their blood pressure can absolutely tank. They can go into shock immediately, right away. The reason is so they've had their system has been flooded with epinephrine and norepinephrine. They've had downregulation of their adrenergic receptors, just like we talked about, right? Alpha and beta and all that stuff. Those get downregulated when you're flooding a system full of a hormone. The receptors get downregulated naturally. So if you take away the tumor, you take away that stimulus, and you now have less receptors, and you take away the catecholamine that the system is depending on to keep its blood pressure up, and now the blood pressure absolutely drops. So you have these two concerns. You got to keep their blood pressure low at the beginning, and you got to keep their blood pressure high at the beginning. And we use different medications to do that. And there's many different ways to achieve this. But their blood pressure also tanks because they've been blockaded with, phenoxybenzamine, phentolamine, metoprolol with those alpha and beta blockades, right? So all of these things matter. You need to keep all these things in mind. So for this particular patient, I set up clofidipine, which is a calcium channel blocker, which lowers blood pressure. It's a drip. All these are drips. Esmolol, which is a beta blocker, and these are all fast-acting, fast on, fast off, to help with the blood pressure beforehand while they're poking the tumor. And then I had norepinephrine and vasopressin and phenylephrine in line as well. I also ended up having epinephrine and angiotensin II in line as well because I was very worried about this patient's blood pressure tanking after this tumor was resected. So that's a lot of drips are going on. What was I going to say? So, and then the patient can also be resistant to like norepinephrine because they can also be resistant to phenylephrine because they're alpha blockaded. Phenylephrine's alpha 1 agonist. And they have an alpha 1 antagonist on board. They have beta blockade on board. So the patient has all these things on board, these antihypertensives before they even come to the surgery, and they can be resistant. Anyway, so vasopressin and angiotensin II, these hit different receptors. Anyway, you got to be very thoughtful about what you choose, right? So I have those things in line ready to go. And then we send the patient off to sleep. And this particular patient did very well with laryngoscopy and putting the breathing tube. The blood pressure did not spike. I've had other like pheochromocytomas where just by putting the breathing tube, their blood pressure goes to 220, 230, and you have to stop and you have to treat that and you have to settle them out before you even do anything else. It can take a long time. So in this patient, the third thing that I'm very much worried about is blood exsanguinating, meaning during the operation while they're resecting on the aorta, the patient can bleed out and can bleed a lot very, very quickly. So I placed a very large bore catheter in the right internal jugular. We call it a RIC, or not a RIC, a Cordis or a MAC introducer. It's a huge thing. And then we had a Belmont in the room, which is basically like a bucket that you dump a bunch of blood into, and it squeezes all the blood into the body very, very quickly. Within just a minute, you can get several units of blood in the body. So I had that all set up, all ready to go. Obviously placed a right radial arterial line. So you need an arterial line to know what the blood pressure is every single moment. You can't just rely on a blood pressure cuff, which at the most gives you blood pressure every minute. But with an arterial line, that's a catheter that you put right into an artery, and you know what the blood pressure is with literally every heartbeat. So obviously that's a no-brainer. And I actually put two in. I put a radial arterial line and a brachial arterial line. So why would I do that? It's because the radial line, this is a long case, booked to be like 12 hours. The radial line could go out because the radial artery is a little bit smaller bore, and it can spasm so much. And it could be so vasoconstricted somewhere during the case that we're giving all these vasoconstrictors that it could stop working. And arterial lines can stop working for many, many reasons. They can clot off, or something can bend or something. So I put in a brachial arterial line as a backup as well. So we did all these things, and the anesthesia portion to get all these things ready, that took about 2 hours after the patient was asleep to even, because you have to treat all the wild swings in blood pressure before you proceed, before a surgeon even gets to the patient. And this patient did very well with all of this. I've had patients that have not done well, meaning we have to stop and take a long time to look at, to treat their blood pressure and to make sure that it doesn't get too high so they don't have a stroke. Got to be very thoughtful and very deliberate and very slow and not rush things. It's very important with these cases. Additionally, I ordered 4 units of blood and had them in a cooler in the room in case the patient bled out. At any time. So this particular patient did very well, extremely well. The preoperative blockade of blood pressure and stopping the sympathetic response to the metericine, I think all that helped very, very well. And fortunately for her, upon surgical exposure, the surgeons were able to peel the tumor away from the aorta without having to resect it and put in a graft, which is a whole other problem. If you have a graft in your aorta, that thing now can become seeded with infection any time in your life. And I've seen people die with, graft infections of their aorta, of aortic grafts, something that can definitely happen. So she got away with that, and she kept one of her kidneys because the urologist was able to peel the ureter away as well, dissect it away from the tumor, and spared all that. And the tumor came out, it was about the size of a softball, and she did incredibly well. I didn't give a single unit of blood. So all of that preparation. So that's one of my points of bringing up the case. Just mountains of preparation, mountains of thought for a complex case, and everything went. I love preparing and not having to use all the stuff that I prepared. I love that. Absolutely love that. Now, I wanted to share with you other things that were happening to me on this very day. So I was covering that room of this paraganglioma tumor resection. My other room was a Whipple. For those that are not aware, a Whipple is another very complex surgery of pancreatic cancer, where they've been deemed to be a candidate to have that resected, and there's a lot of bowel reconstruction that goes on with it. It's very long, complicated surgery. We have that's done with a surgeon who's very specialized in doing this procedure. So that's a big case on its own. I was doing this. I was covering that room in addition to covering my other room of this paraganglioma, and the other room, with a Whipple involved putting an epidural and A-line and blood resuscitation and things like that. And then, so I had that going on. That patient fortunately did well. And then on this same day, later in the afternoon, there was a code in another operating room, not a room that I was covering, after induction, and so I was involved in that room, helping with resuscitating the patient, who was in some sort of cardiac arrest, and we eventually put that patient on ECMO in the operating room, scrubbed in. We placed the femoral arterial VA ECMO to get that patient to a cath lab. All of these things are happening all on the same day. I'm mostly just bringing up that the the world of anesthesia you can have a day like that, right? I mean, it was a crazy day. It was great, right? I'm so happy to be a part of such amazing teams and such incredible care at a great institution that I really enjoy working at. But then you can have days where you're just covering a couple sinus surgeries that are, from the anesthetic perspective, are quite straightforward, and there's I don't have to do a lot of thought. I don't have to expend a whole lot of mental energy to cover these patients' rooms, right? The nurse anesthetists I work with, I've mentioned before, the group I work with are particularly good, and at my institution as a group are very, very good, extremely competent people, and so there's not a lot of oversight in a lot of rooms that I have to be involved with, which is fine. This is the ebb and flow of the world of anesthesia. All right, I'm going to just jump into a book that I read recently. This is called The Tragedy of Liberation, A History of the Chinese Revolution from 1945 to 1957. This is by Frank Dikotter. I don't think I'm saying that name right. This guy has written a ton. He's a China historian. He's a chair professor of humanities at the University of Hong Kong and a professor of modern history of China. And he's written tons of books about Mao and the rise of Mao and just Chinese history. So, and this is my first read of him that I've taken a delve into. It's about 400 pages. It was published in 2013. So this covers after Mao had taken over. This guy wrote a book before this, The Rise of Mao, and this is more when the Chinese Communist Party had now taken over and the absolute social turmoil that happened as a consequence. So just digging into it a little more. So if you're looking for an overview of the rise of Mao, this book is not the good place to start. And this is an extremely difficult book to read. It largely covers 1945 to 1957 and begins mostly with war and in Manchuria between the communists and the nationalists, right? Who's the outgoing, failing party, the Chinese party, political party against the communists, which Mao was the head of. Although a little of this book does cover the previous peasant revolts, the culling of the landlords that led to the rise of Mao, and I do plan on reading that previous book. So with this, you'll get a broad overview of the swift but arbitrary class distinctions of the quote poor and the quote slightly less poor after Mao finally took power, which resulted in domestic divisions, social turmoil, and obscene amounts of state violence. I mean, unbelievable things that have happened. You have land reforms, basically just state seizure of land, which resulted in somewhere like 1.5 million dead from hunger and starvation, famine. There is an insane amount of counter-revolutionary panic violence, which resulted in scores of innocent dead civilians, including children. Mao literally instituted death and arrest quotas for any given population. Then comes the infatuation of Mao with Stalin and the pro-Soviet propaganda everywhere throughout China, despite Mao basically being treated like a subordinate Baltic state. Mao got a little bit of military and economic aid from tons of concessions made to Stalin. Soon, there was after Mao took over, there was 150,000 Soviet soldiers in China. It was basically a Baltic subordinate state to Stalin. And then Korea happened. And Mao insisted on helping the communists fight there, along with Russia, which resulted in an eventual standoff, which we all know about. Soon followed widespread paranoia about U.S. biological warfare, resulting in state quotas for collecting rat tails and killing bugs, because there was a fear that they were biological vectors from the Americans. You have impoverished and starving people raising rats to then kill them, to then turn the tails into the state for money. This kind of insanity was everywhere. And this book really goes into detail. Then there was the bourgeoisie purge, resulting in a ton of, quote, capitalists just dead, sanctioned, or they're imprisoned in labor camps, the gulag. Purges like that, along with thought reform and re-education, Mao constructed a very nice tyrannical house of cards for himself while he and his cadres lived in total excess. The state collectivism and cooperations which ensued were an absolute disaster. State wheat monopolization resulted in starvation, protests, hoarding, waste, death. As the economy imploded with inflation, it became clear along the way that Mao knew nothing about economics. You'd think the vast labor and prison networks that were created would provide free labor for the state, but there wasn't even enough infrastructure to use the raw human labor. There was wide suppression of Buddhism, Taoism, with closure of temples. I know this I'm just giving you kind of a scattered approach here, but this book was really hard to get through. It finished off with about around the era of the de-Stalinization era of Khrushchev, who made Mao change his tactics. And what I thought seemed too clever for Mao, he also publicly opened up about protest and dissent being able to be voiced, only then to tighten the fist back again once the counter-revolutionary traitors and intellectuals were exposed. This book does not cover the Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution that happened afterward, which again, I want to read that book. In my opinion, Mao was an abject tyrant and a hypocrite. The peasant revolution he helped usher in resulted in vast human rights violations, death, disease, starvation, and nothing even close to what communism and socialism are supposed to be in theory. And just to take a liberty to express more opinions here, whether someone is espousing, free market capitalism solutions or communism as a viable model to reduce poverty or to liberate the masses, the no true Scotsman fallacy is used far too often. I've talked about that before. Here's what I mean. One can argue, hey, the CCP and the Soviets were just right-wingers under the guise of leftist ideology, and that communism actually does work if it's instituted in its purest form, right? Someone can say that. And then on the other end, someone can argue, capitalism works great when it's used in its most pure form, as described by economists like Friedman and Hayek and Sowell and von Mises. This is the no true Scotsman fallacy. Where, just to boil it down, if you haven't heard that before, I think I've mentioned on my podcast, The no true Scotsman fallacy is an example is someone says, no Scotsman puts sugar in their tea. And someone says, my uncle is a Scotsman, and he puts sugar in their tea. And the other person responds, well, no true Scotsman does it. So you constantly change your definition of what you think. You're constantly trying to find that pure ideology. And that's what this is. That's what I'm talking about. Both communism and capitalism, as pure theories, can, in my opinion, they can never be instituted. Successful modern-day societies are clearly combinations of strong constitutional republics, representative democracies, liberalized markets within state regulations, as well as Keynesian fiscal and monetary stabilization. Are these systems perfect? Of course they're not. I'm not even saying we should have these systems, but they are the current systems that we have that have resulted in the most successful modern societies, in my opinion. People quote, "Oh, well, China has become a successful communist society." That's a really disingenuous, in my opinion, take to make, because what's happened with China, right, in the last 20, 30 years, it has had incredible progress, neck-breaking industrialization, and so people attribute that to like, well, the CCP is doing something right. Now, the CCP may be doing something right, in the last couple of years, but it's not because of a single party rule or communist ideology. The leaders of the CCP have shrewdly tethered their surplus economy to the United States, and they invest in United States bonds. And so, what they basically what they do, they have a hyper-finance model. They just flood everything with capital. They're flooding everything with infrastructure building based on cheap credit. And they have an unbelievable amount of surplus that they, export, right, to the United States, we're an enormous consumer of their surplus. And that's one of the reasons they can even survive, is because of their dependency on American consumerism. There's a lot more components here, and I am not an expert on geopolitics, but I do read a lot about it. But here's my point. I see people, so I make videos sometimes about stuff like this, capitalism, communism, stuff like that. And some people that are like, are self-proclaimed communists will say China has the most successful country it's ever been. And it's like, it's as I said, it's completely disingenuous, because they're completely reliant on a capitalist, globalized world order. That is the reason that they've had neck-breaking industrial speed. And then you combine their fertility, their plummeting fertility rates, and the fact that they have terrible trade imbalance, and that if their waterways were in any way threatened, or if people stopped trading with them, their economy could possibly collapse. They could have mass starvation, and that their economy is tethered to the United States, not only our U.S. bond market and our consumer market. It's all tied together. This has nothing to do with communist ideology, right? The problem is single party rule, regardless of an espoused ideology. Single party rule is bad. It is the source of the complete disaster of Maoism and every other form of authoritarian rule. It's the reason the Soviet rule was mostly a complete and utter disaster. The Soviets had their moments, but it's single party rule. That's the problem. The ideologies are just vehicles for single party rule. That's my take home from this. If you care about my opinion on this thing, it's single party rule is the problem. It's not the ideology. I don't care. You've heard me say it a million times. I don't care about the ideology. Ideology is all black magic, right? People just, here's an ideology. Here's this. Oh, blah, 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 right? They use those things as political rhetoric, whether it's populism. And the left and right use this, right? And single party rule is the problem. It doesn't matter where it lays on the political spectrum. It is the problem. And it is the reason that Maoism was a complete and utter disaster. Now, when I make videos, so I am for social democratic policy, which is not socialism and is not communism. And the American right likes to vilify social democratic policy, right? Social democratic policy is just think FDR era politics, New Deal stuff, right? Bolster your social state. You tax the ultra wealthy to limit their power. You have a very progressive tax on capital. universal health care, canceling of student debt, all these things. This is social democratic policy, which is not democratic socialism. Socialism is akin to communism. It's a withering of, trying to get a withering of the state. Anyway, I'm getting too lost in the weeds here. Back to my point. So I support social democratic policy. I'm not a social democrat. I don't like prescribing to any ideology, but I support social democratic policy because I think it will result in actual change swiftly for many people and impoverished people as well. Now I'll make videos in support of social democratic policy, and I'll get people commenting like, "Oh yeah, comrade." Like, no, I am not a comrade. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a communist. And to call yourself a comrade, I think is a huge insult to the vast human rights violations, death and murder that have happened under Soviet rule. I am not a comrade. I'm baffled that people call themselves comrade. I'm actually baffled people call themselves communists, and I'm baffled that they call themselves socialists, based on the communist regimes that have happened throughout history that have resulted in unbelievable human rights violations. Now, there have been unbelievable human rights violations from the United States as well, which has never been espoused to be, communist or socialist state, of course, right? And you could even say that they are almost equal to the human rights violations by single party communist regimes. And that's a topic for another time. And I do make that statement in all seriousness. The United States has wreaked unbelievable social, cultural turmoil. It's been at war 90% of its existence to ensure that it maintains a globalized world order. So I guess I don't know what my point is. I've made many. You take what you want from my rant here. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. All right. Anyway, I'm a little pressed for time today, so that'll be the episode. Email me at icudoctor@gmail.com. I'm on TikTok. ICUDoctor is my handle. I'm on Instagram. ICUDoctor TikTok. Email me, message me for anything. I'm get lots of emails from listeners, and that encourages me to keep doing this. Right, I do this as just a public service. I make no money through any social media platform or podcast, and that's what I intend to keep that. So that my opinions about things are unadulterated, and you're just getting things that I have to say that are not influenced by any financial incentive whatsoever. That's something I gladly say, and I'm happy to say that. And because of that, if you enjoy this podcast and you want it to grow more, then leaving reviews is one of the best ways to do that. And also just sharing the podcast with friends and family, just being like, "Oh yeah, it's a great podcast." Send them the link to the podcast so they can listen. It's all up to you. If you want the podcast to grow, it's up to the listeners, right? I'm just here. I'll keep doing it as much as I can. But if you want it to grow, it's up to you. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll see you hopefully next week. But again, I'm having trouble doing this weekly, but I'll keep it up as much as I can. Thanks.